Welcome everybody officially to our webinar today. We're so happy to be here with you guys for, as I mentioned, part 2 of our this great DQM webinar series that we're doing with EarthSoft and DDMS. And honestly, really, Dee and Polly are doing a lot of the heavy lifting for these. And so we very much appreciate that and have been having a lot of fun collaborating and working together on this. And so Polly, you might give kind of some other introductions here in just a second, but I'll just briefly say, so Liz and I are from EarthSoft. For those of you guys that don't recognize us, we're in both in the training and marketing communications team. We're happy to be here. Liz is also one of EarthSoft's resident sort of DQM subject matter experts for sure. And we also have Ruth Callahan on the line from EarthSoft, who's also, I would say, our other DQM subject matter expert for sure. So nice to have both of these two ladies with us. And then we have Polly and Dee from DDMS. And Polly, I'll probably let you just give a brief introduction for you guys, and then Dee, we'll go ahead and turn things over to you, I think.
Thanks. Yes, I'm Polly Newbold, and Dee Shepard is here with me as well. And as she said, we're both with DDMS, and we have, as Emily said, we've been part of this process with these 3 women for the last several weeks, and it's really been educational for us and a lot of fun. So Dee, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you first, I guess, maybe do a little bit of a recap of what was discussed in session 1 and then go into session 2.
Yes, we did our first session, was kind of an overview. We discussed what data review and validation is all about. Then we discussed what DQM is and what it does. And then we talked about the fact that DDMS is using DQM in a couple of different ways. And this session, we're going to kind of dive down into a bit more detail on the first one of those ways, where we're using DQM to do a 2A review. And we'll try to make that, as clear as possible. There will be opportunity to ask questions, and we'll try to cover anything we can. And if we can't answer it right away, we'll try to get back to you on it. And we'd also like to invite you to join in the third session, and we will dive down into the use of DQM as part of the process for more involved data validation and review. So, and as Emily said, that's going to be 2 weeks from now, so that not very long to go. Okay, and I'd also, this time I want to start by giving a shout out to all of our colleagues, both at DDMS and at EarthSoft, who have helped us get where we are with this process and put all this together and made it possible, because this is really a great experience for all of us. Okay, so first we're going to jump back to the last session, and we had a couple of questions that I have to figure out how to advance the slide. Hold on. There we go. We had a couple of questions, and that came at the sort of during the process, such as we'll do this time around. But I have to relate a funny moment, because if anybody's familiar with the old Saturday Night Live show back in the 70s, there was a character that Gilda Radner played, Emily Latella, and each week she would comment editorially on some current event, something that was out there in the news. And after a long diatribe that she would give on this subject, she would find out at the end, I think Chevy Chase is the one that would correct her, that she'd gotten it all wrong. I recall one that was something about busting school children. Was a pretty funny adventure. So I had one of these last session. The question was about Canada. And of course I answered about cannabis. So a little Emily Latella there. And to answer what I can of that question, the point made was that there aren't really any validation guidelines or requirements to validate in Canada. So my answer to that would be, okay, that may be the case, but I'm imagining that there would be occasions where you would want to know how accurate, precise your data are and whether they're defensible. I don't think those are like magic unicorns no matter where you are. So the process would be pretty much the same, regardless of where you are or what type of data you're looking at or what the methods are or anything. It's basically, what's out there, how much of it's there, and how can you prove that? Did you have a good measurement system and a good specificity and accuracy for that? So I'm surprised that there isn't anything like that going on in Canada, but that the answers that I gave to the cannabis questions are kind of the same. Even though there aren't guidelines, it's pretty logical and it's pretty common sense. So there are ways to do that, and I would think it would probably serve, at least in some instances where there's going to be scrutiny, it would serve a good purpose. Then we also there were some questions about the qualifications for blank, like hierarchy of qualifications. And I think I'll cover that one a little bit later on in the presentation. We talked a little bit about what do you do. People have found that there are often times when the lab digital data in the EDD don't necessarily match what's in the hard copy report. And that is a huge issue, happens a lot. It can be anything from a number's a little bit different because it rounded some way before reporting to things where there might be a complete miss of an analyte or even a method. There could be things that are included that shouldn't have been. We see all of that kind of stuff. At this point, that's still got to be pretty much a manual process. One approach is to sort of do like a 10% check on comparison. There are different strategies for doing that type of stuff. If you don't find anything out of the ordinary, 10% might be great. If you find something, you may have to dig down deeper, look a little closer. And, if anytime that ever happens, the first thing you got to do is let the lab know that there are these discrepancies, because they're not always aware and they need to be informed so they can correct things. But I don't have an answer for that one. There's no magic bullet. As more data are generated and provided in electronic format, it will be the ability to check those things automatically will increase, and there will be Earthsoft will have news to tell you about on things that are up and coming for that kind of thing. Another thing that was mentioned last time around was what do you do when you have multiple qualifiers, and we'll kind of get into that one a little bit later on. Also, I think those were the biggies that were kind of hanging out there.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And I was going to say, Dee, do we want to get people warmed up, launch the first poll question now?
I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
Let's throw a poll question out there.
Thank you. Get your clickers ready, everybody. So here's our
There'll be a quiz
question
at the end.
That's right. That's right. This should be an easy one, hopefully. Are you familiar, first of all, so we kind of know who we're talking to, are you familiar with automated data validation? And so we're just curious what people are going to say here. We'll give you, most people have voted already, so that's great, but we'll give you
all right.
5 for 10 more seconds here.
Well, I guess another thing to point out too is if you keep an eye on that chat window, you might see some information on upcoming builds and revisions that Earthsoft folks will put there for our, just to give us hints on what's coming, what's up and coming.
Yeah. Yeah, and these results are sort of interesting. Let me just share these really quick, which is just so folks kind of know who's on the call with us today, in terms of how comfortable people are with automated data validation. So this should be fun. We have quite a mix of folks here. So there we have it. First poll. All right.
Okay. All right. So we're going to review a little bit from session 1. I have a couple. Here we go. So things to keep in mind are that there are really 2 questions we're trying to answer whenever we do collect samples and analyze them. And those are the 2 basic questions: what's there and how much. And sometimes keep in mind that the non-detects are every bit as important as the detections, especially if you're trying to meet some kind of cleanup criteria or something like that. You really have to know at what threshold you are saying it's not detected. That can be extremely important. Next, there we go. I'm not doing well with the clicker here. Then we wanted to just discuss real quickly again, there are a lot of different levels of data produced by the laboratory and the levels of review that can be done on it. I always think of it as like a pyramid. The analytical result is the very apex of that pyramid, and there's a whole lot of information and documentation and stuff that goes on underneath that supports that. And each level of validation or review that you go through deeper and deeper gets into more of that until you get down to a full review for perhaps like litigation or something where you want to know that every T is crossed and every I is dotted. Okay, so the DQM process that we're going to talk about today is where we're doing a 2A review, which is just the surface. It's that smallest part of the pyramid there. And we're looking at just the summary data. So what do we need to do a 2A review? Keep in mind, there will be some of it that's automated. There will be some of it's still going to be manual. The thing, of course, you need is data. That includes your sample documentation, because you have to know how the sample was collected and you have to know how it was handled from the point of collection. You have to have the results, whether they're in Form 1s and an EDD or one or the other. You have to know what the laboratory reported, and you have to have the summaries for all of the QC samples that were performed, blanks, spikes, duplicates, any method-specific QC that are generated. Any of those things have to be available also. And then you have to know what you're assessing against, whether it's method criteria, something from a project-specific QAP, whether you're looking at a particular region, any of those sets of rules. DDMS uses, in the absence of other guidance and sometimes in place of other guidance, if those are a little too wide and low, we use default criteria. And one of the reasons for that is because they don't change. You get a laboratory, you change laboratories, the lab updates their limits periodically. All of those things can change. And if you've got a project that goes on over time, that can be a little concerning, because you might get values that are qualified at one sample event that would not be at a later sample event, and can make data comparison very difficult. So that being said, after you get done with a review or data validation, what do you expect to get out of that? You should get some sort of assessment of how good, how sound, how usable your data are. And that would include accuracy and precision. It might also include representativeness. Consider a site where you're doing a lot of soils and things like that. You want to know how good those numbers are, how much variability there might be. Completeness is a big open subject. It can be data package completeness. It can be, did everything get analyzed that was supposed to? There are a lot of elements of completeness that may or may not be part, it should be defined by your rule book that you're following for that project, what you need to determine. Other things are, did it meet the DQOs for the project? That may be part of the scope, it may not. Does it meet the project action limits? And then sort of an overall assessment of the entire data set. Is it good? How sound is it? Should you worry? Those kind of questions should be answered for you. And then last, from review of the first session, are the kind of qualifiers that you're going to typically see. These are not all inclusive. These are just the most common ones. And to that question of multiple qualifiers, there is a hierarchy. Obviously, if you reject the result, that takes precedence over everything else, because essentially you're saying you don't have a usable result. The sample was run, but you've got nothing. You can't use any of the numbers associated with that. A rejected result, keep in mind, the reporting limit means nothing. The MDL means nothing. You've got no numerical result whatsoever. if you have a, there's no, although sometimes we wish that we could have like JJ, if there's a lot of reasons to have it, there's no point. There's one J. If you have a non-detect and the reporting limit is estimated, you have a UJ. If you have an estimated quantity and you're also not sure about the identity, you have the NJ. That's about it for the multiple qualifiers. And there is a hierarchy in that, like I say, the R overrides everything. If something's been determined to be non-detect based on blank contamination or for some other reason, then those U's are the dominant qualifier. A J, if you know a bias, if you can look at a potential bias because of low recoveries, high recoveries, whatever, those are great. But if there's no indication of bias, it has to remain just a J, just an estimated value. All right, so moving on. What do we, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Before we do that, I was going to say, do we want to do actually two of our poll questions before we get deep into the 2A?
It's in my notes and I just blew right over it, but yeah, let's do another poll question.
No problem. Okay, so this one should be fun. So before we get too far into the 2A, the question is, what is the level of data validation most often performed on your projects? And of course, if you guys aren't doing any, you can select none, but looks like the 2A is was edging things out, but now things are evening out a little bit more. Almost have the majority of people voted. We'll give you, I don't know, 5 more seconds. And you can select all that apply, obviously, as well. Pretty close. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close it, and I will share this result with you guys as well, which, so it's a bit of a mix. And so this was 87% of folks voted, but keep in mind that people could choose, more than one result here, obviously. And so I think a number of people probably selected 2A and 2B, or maybe full or something. So great. And let's actually do one more really quick, which is an important question here. And that is your data validated in-house or by a third party? And so go ahead and take a few seconds and we'll vote for this one as well. Right now, it looks like in-house is handily winning here, but we'll see what. And most folks have voted already on this one. Pretty close. Give it 3 more seconds.
I guess we should have asked the question of, how many people are already familiar with DQM, because I know some of the folks on the webinar are using it. So
yeah,
and I have to apologize to those people if, I'm relatively new to DQM. I've only been working with it for, I don't know, how long, Polly? It hasn't been a year. I don't know, probably not quite that long, but somewhere around there. So I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that know a heck of a lot more about it than I do. I just know how I'm using it and learning all the time, as Benny Hill would say.
Perfect. Well, it's a good perspective, I think. So cool. So most folks looks like are validating in-house as well. Excellent.
All right. Well, this is kind of a lineup of what we ourselves look to have when we're going to do a 2A review. We oftentimes, a reduced laboratory report is sufficient generally to do 2A. So then the next thing you need besides a good narrative is a set of summary forms. And those, everybody talks about CLP. Again, CLP is like the Six Sigma of environmental data. So there are a series of forms. We will still, call them Form 1s and 2s and all that, but they are basically the summary forms for all of the analytical results for both the field samples and the QC samples that are included. And then you need chain of custody and documentation of sample integrity. So those things, a lot of that has to be manual at this point. The more that the electronic COCs are used and the more that electronic field notes and things are used, more of that will be able to be done, electronically and in automated checks. Then you also need to know, if this is part of the scope for the review, you need to know what field samples were collected. If there were duplicates, you need to know how they're identified. They're generally sent in blind. So you have to have somebody, the client, sampler or somebody tell you which ones go together so you can do the comparison appropriately. A lot of times you also need to know some details on the field blanks, because there's a lot of different strategies used for collecting field blanks and for what's used to create the field blanks, whether it's lab water or something from the site. It's not unusual to get samples identified as field blanks on a COC that you're not really sure exactly what they are. And that's nobody's fault. It's just a thing that has to be clarified before you go applying qualification to sample results associated with a particular blank. You got to know that it actually applies to that. So, and then of course, we want an EDD. We want the electronic deliverable so that we can do both looking at things ourselves. It's an easy way to filter and sort and look at stuff, and then that we can run it through DQM. And that, there we go. Being said, we need an EDD that we can load and use DQM on. We get a lot of EDDs at DDMS. We get a lot of EDDs from a lot of different projects, a lot of different clients. Some of them are in EQuIS format that makes it easy for us to use. We do still sometimes have to do some things to adjust stuff so that it will work for DQM. But then we also get EDDs that are a long way from what we need, and we have to do work to make them amenable to the process. And on occasion, we get data and no EDDs because there are some labs that just don't have that capability. So it completely depends on where the data are coming from and what capabilities they have to produce the kind of EDD that's needed. And then the other piece of that is once the process is complete and you're giving an EDD back to the client, it may have to be in a particular format for them to be able to use it with their database or to report it to an agency or whatever's needed for them. So some of the things that you need to make sure are right in your EDDs are, of course, if the information in cells doesn't match, you can't expect the DQM process to work on it. So you have to make sure that you're using the correct names for things and that you're using the correct nomenclature for sample IDs, like the QC samples and things like that. They have to match or they won't work. The non-standard EDDs that we get, a lot of times those are the things that happen. The data are organized in a fashion that isn't recognizable for DQM, or there are values in their names or qualities that don't match up and it can't use them. So those are things just to keep in mind. It's not, you can't just grab the thing, throw it in there and it all works unless it's, already ready to do that. The other piece that you need to make to run DQM is a QuAP. And to do that, you're basically building the structure that's going to be used to do all of these checks. So it's again, here's the layperson talking about this, but this is the way I understand it. It's a whole set of interrelated tables that you have to have the correct information in to be able to run it through the checks. And the ERSOF gives us a starter QuAP, and there's a lot of pre-built stuff, but then we get to customize things so that it'll do it the way we want it to. Some of the things that are built in there are every method that you're going to run DQM on has to be included. Any analytes that are part of that, any of the targets that you're going to look at need to be in there. If you've got surrogates, those have to be in for the methods that use those. You build in your limits, what recoveries for spikes, recoveries for surrogates. If you have a minimum, you set all these things. These are all customizable. So you set this up the way you want it. And holding times for the different parameters, those are also built in. Preservatives, Like I say, the lab QC sample types, laboratory blanks, field blanks, LCSs, those matrix spikes, those things are built in and they have to be identified correctly, but the checks are built to be able to look at all of those and look at recoveries and RPDs, and soon RSDs also, if I understand correctly. So like I say, this is always being improved and built on, so it keeps getting better. Then field QC samples can also be handled, but like I say, you have to know what they are ahead of time to be able to identify them correctly. And then keep in mind that DDMS uses DQM in a number of different ways. We have clients where we're using DQM for a single project, which is the way that DQM is really built. You've got repetitive sampling events, the same laboratory, the same sets of methods, the same limits over and over again. So you're essentially getting repetitive data sets that you're running through there. A lot of you may be using it this way. And that's the way it works, the way it was built to work. And that's the way it does well. There's a lot of front loading that goes into that. Building of the QuAP is a bit intensive because you have to get all that information in there and check it and make sure it's all correct, run some tests, make sure it's doing what you think it is, but then you're set and you can just keep going. For the way ECS in particular is using it now, we wanted to be able to, we get a lot of one-offs, we get a lot of single projects, we get a lot of things that are not standard. So in order to make it as efficient as possible, we didn't want to have to build a QuAP for each thing that comes in. That could be, in essence, we could spend more time building a QuAP to run it than it would actually take to just validate the data. So instead, we built, I like to call it the one big box approach, where you're building it for each project. Those are like little individual boxes, and that's great. But for us, we needed something where we can just use the same QuAP over and over to do pretty much everything. I guess we should have a poll question about now too. I see it's in my notes that I was blowing over. Yeah.
No, let's do it. This is a good time for it, I think. So I think this will be our last one, guys. So then you can sit back and relax a little bit. So let's do this last one here, which is, which part of your analytical data do you review? And you only get one choice here, so good luck.
Are there grades when we're done? Do we get graded?
I think that's a great idea. We'll do it. And in the meantime, I'll just mention this while we give folks a chance to vote. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but for all the different acronyms that are coming up, somebody had a great suggestion to, if we could define those. So Liz and I have been posting the acronym definitions in the chat as we've been going as well. It's been kind of like a fun bingo game for us, but anyway, so if you're stuck on an acronym or anything, take a look at the chat because we'll keep posting stuff in there.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm merciless with that. I just throw them out there. Yeah,
it's way too easy to do, I think. So okay. So most folks have voted, and so let me just share this and see if it ruins it again for us. But so most folks, it looks like, are looking at all of their analytical data during their review. So great.
All right, that's excellent. Yeah, there are strategies, for doing different levels based on how long you've been looking at the same sampling locations or how long you've been using the same lab, those kind of things. So there is a strategy to use there when you do need to kind of cut back on, if you've been running the same project for, 20 years and you've been using the same lab, the QuAP, your project has been the same, the scope has been the same. It's reasonable to back off and then only go diving in if you see something really out of whack and go deeper. Okay, so I just took some snapshots of some of the tables. There are lots of tables. I'm not going to show you every one. And you can get on Earthsoft's website and get a whole lot of information, or ask them for a demo and sit in on one of those, and you can learn a whole lot in a hurry. But I'm just going to show you some pieces here to give you an idea of what we've done for kind of our all-encompassing QuAP. This just is a snapshot of some parts for metals. You can see that we got matrix method, what those analytes are, targets, and the CAS number, which is the key to everything, and what the analytes are. And then this is just a piece of the limits that are, it keeps on going out to the right. That's all the recoveries, maximums, minimums, RPDs, lower cutoff, at which point you might reject a data point, those kind of things. So this is the control limits tab. And then we also have rules on, you set up the rules on how you want exceptions to be handled. What is an exception? And then what do you want done with it? So these kind of explain what those are and set up some of the things. There's blank multipliers, at which point you want to call something a blank contamination and not an authentic sample component. Most of this stuff is customizable. You can go in there and adjust it to fit your needs or the needs of a particular project. Like I say, we are kind of using it with default values, and then when we need to do something special, we either build something special on the side and run that also, or we come in and make some changes. And I'll get to that in a little bit, because that's a really important process too. Change control can cause you all kinds of problems if you don't do it correctly. All right, so there are a couple more tables. We set up what the rules are and what these different checks are going to do and how they're going to be handled. This one, you can see kind of the remarks that will show up on the output from DQM are kind of a shorthand explanation of why something is qualified or changed. And those are also can be customized. You can also do user-defined codes that can then be used to populate. And over here, the reason codes, we've created, these are the, I think these are the onboard starter ones, but we can also customize, create our own codes, and then they will populate the report when we're done. And you can see what some of those checks look like and what they do. And then also we want to, this one defines what's going to happen when an exception is found, what qualifier is going to be applied, and for what reasons. If it exceeded a criterion, or there was a blank contamination or something, it'll show up as a remark, an explanation, and then the appropriate qualifier. One thing that does happen, the NQ, that's no qualifier or not qualified. Correct me, I don't know which one it means, but there's no qualifier applied. And that is kind of like a space holder because you need to have something in the field. So that's what's there. All right. So for DDMS, what we do for the 2A review, the manual portion, this is kind of our process. We look first to see what the lab had to say, because you want to know what went on from the time they received it until the time they produced the results. Then we need to know that the sample that was analyzed was sound. There's no reason to worry about whether, I keep falling back to the age-old example of volatiles in soil, where they used to take a couple of spoonfuls, throw it in a bowl, mix it up, and then stuff it into volatile vials. That's a classic, like, volatiles are lost. There's no way around it. Fortunately, we don't do that anymore. But that kind of thing, if the sample got too hot, you're not going to find the bacteria that you're looking for. If it was frozen, same thing can happen. All those kind of things play in. Data package completeness, again, we pretty much have to do that manually. And that would be a good place to be checking whether it matches what's reported in an EDD, whether the analyte list is the same, all those kind of things. Field duplicate comparison, that can be done, but again, you have to be able to identify, what samples are the field duplicates. So that can be tricky. And a lot of times we end up doing that manually. Field blank assessment, same thing. If it's usually a matter for us of doing it manually to some extent. Even if we have a check for it, we want to go back and check and make sure we've done what we needed to do. Professional judgment always plays a big part in data review and validation. So we, taking even even after you've been using it for a while, you still want to keep verifying that you're getting what you think you are. Interparameter relationships, things like dissolved and total metals and things like that. Although, again, there are things in the works to do some of these checks that aren't done now, and they will be able to be done electronically. Serial dilutions is another one. Like I say, there are a lot of, everybody knows the methods oftentimes have a very specific QC elements that go into it, and those things can be built in later as people need them. Another thing that we end up having to do manually is choosing the best result if there are multiple dilutions, perhaps some out of hold, some, for out of calibration range, whatever. Again, DQM can help you with that because it'll point out what is out of hold and what out, things that are exceptions, but the data reviewer actually has to go in and choose those things and set that to the reportable. And then anything that isn't in the EDD obviously has to be looked at manually. So the automated portion, the things that DQM, we count on it to do are things like this. The J values, obviously, between the MDL and the PQL are all flagged by, should be all flagged by the laboratory. And DQM will show you those and allow you to review them and see if there's anything going on there. Some parts of the sample integrity, the chemical preservation and holding time can be checked. Blank assessments, surrogate spikes. And again, it will alert you if there are multiple results for a sample analyte, either the same method, re-extractions or dilutions, or from different methods. If you think of like heavy volatiles that can also be analyzed by an extraction, those kind of things will show up. And sample duplicates. So those things can all be done automated. And let me say one thing before we do that, because one of the two big reasons for us to be using DQM to do this, and for anybody that's using it, this is appropriate. It allows you to cut the time on reviewing data because this is grunt work. If a person has to do this by eye, it's long and tedious, and it's also a real good opportunity for errors. Everybody that's ever filtered a spreadsheet or something knows that it's easy to make a mistake, not realize that you've got something excluded, and that kind of thing goes on. And then the other part of this is that at the end of the DQM process, those qualifiers and reason codes and things get automatically uploaded to your database. So any kind of transcription errors and stuff are cut way down. So you don't have to worry about those kind of things. So that's part of what we really wanted to get, was both the efficiency of it and the reduction in errors. All right, so when we start the actual DQM event, this is what the screen looks like when you're starting it. Anybody who's familiar with running it and already knows. I'm just using as an example the Ursolf starter QAP here, and you select which QAP you want to use, and that sets in place all of those limits, all of the methods, matrices, everything that you've already set up in that rule book, if you will. And then you select all the different checks that you want to run. And the one that's asterisk is the holding times, because there's quite a number on the right-hand side of types of holding time checks that can be done. And you select those that you want. And now the next thing you do is select your data set that you want to look at. I just used a method analyte group for example, because obviously we have client confidentiality and all that, and I didn't want to throw up a bunch of stuff. At some point, I'll make up a dummy data set so that we can actually do a demo that will not compromise anyone. But at this point, I just made some screenshots instead. But you can see that you can choose your data set by, probably the most common that we do is by lab SDG, because that's going to be a data set that you're getting in a single report generally. But you can also do it by test batch, task codes, sample codes, chain of custody, or field SDGs. So you've got a lot of different options there on how you want to look at a specific set of data. And you can look at multiple sets within the same lab SDG. And then the next thing that you want to do is check to make sure that all your selections are what you want them to be. So these were all of the checks that I had selected, and this is what I want DQM to do for me on the data set that I've chosen. So then you would hit the start event button and let it roll. It's pretty quick, but it's also dependent on how big your data set is and how many different methods and analytes and all, because it's working through all of that information. When it finishes running, you got an event report. And again, so anybody's welcome to correct me at any time, because here's what I know. This is the kind of the summary of the report. This tells you how many different records have been checked and what the different checks are and what was found. So it's just kind of an overview of what DQM came up with when it looked for exceptions. And you can see that there were a lot here. Holding times, I'm not sure what this data set was, but it's got some things to look at. Then it's a multi-tab report, and you can see up at the top there's event summary and review exceptions by check, review all results, and then sample specific results, and then an error tab. As I recall, this error set on this particular data set was mostly multiple results because they had run a re-extraction on almost everything that was organic. So looking here, these are the holding time checks. The little drop down at the top that says holding time, DQM check, that drop down will give you all the different checks where an exception was found. And when you select those tabs, you will get the output from that. The top window will give you what the exceptions are. The bottom will give you what results are associated with that, the things that would be qualified. You can see in the column DQM queue, you can see what qualifier DQM chose to select, and you can see what the lab's original qualifier was. If the validator has gone in and changed or added qualification, that's done here. All of this is where you check and edit the output. And you can see that all of those things have been populated. I think I have another one. So these are surrogates. So the surrogates that failed are on the top, and then they're related to whichever sample that exception was. You can associate those. And we should talk about the surrogate thing for a second, because EarthSoft it was originally the kind of National Functional Guidelines, NFG rules, where if you had a surrogate out, you were still okay. If you had two surrogates out, your whole fraction, acid extractables, base neutral extractables, pesticides, whatever, would be qualified. EarthSoft created a module now where it can look at specific surrogates associated with specific compounds. It's a little bit rigid at this point, but they're improving it, and it's going to get better. So that's up and coming. It's been kind of a bump in the road for us, but we've found ways to get around it and work with it, and it's going to get better when they do the next build. So they'll tell you about that. Then this one is just the repeated results from two methods. And like I say, this oftentimes happens where you have compounds that might have been heavy volatiles, but they're also the light semis. And so those things might overlap, or other, that's about it for two methods, I think, that we see in this data set. But there could be other instances where you've got reported results for more than one run or more than one dilution or whatever. So, all right. And I think you can see where the remarks, those are the remarks that will be applied. And as we said earlier, you can customize those to be the kind of text that you want to have. And you can create your own user-defined codes that you can then use to populate these. All right. There we go. And then this is these are all the results from a particular sample, so that you can actually get an overview of everything that was reported for one sample. You can also look at the entire data set all in one. So if you're trying to make a judgment on, just the quality of how your data set looks, you can actually look at everything all at once, and then you can do filtering and whatever right there. So you can use this kind of like the EDD itself. That's the tab right here. This will have all of the samples. Everything that DQM ran a check on is going to be in here. And we did run into a little bit of a bump in the road with this as far as prep and analytical batches. And again, that there are ways around that. There are ways to work with it. And ERSOFT found a kind of a solution for it. And there will be, I believe there will be some changes coming up on that too. So they'll keep you posted. All right. So what kind of things would we go in then to DQM and maybe want to adjust or change or add? Things where if we felt the qualifier was not appropriate, maybe we put the limit in wrong, or maybe there was a reason not to go there, we could add, we can change the qualifier, we can add reason codes, we can add remarks. We might remove a qualifier if we felt that it wasn't needed, because sometimes you have some other support for something. You might think that you needed to estimate something with a result because of a particular problem in the data. And then if you look at the entire data set, there might be some other kind of support for it. So there are reasons to remove them sometimes. Same with the reason codes. If we didn't agree with something, and we're using our professional judgment to come up with something like that, or we wanted to use things that we've defined perhaps if we didn't have the field dupes identified, for instance, and we needed to go and do that manually, we can do that. We can go in and put those in ourselves. So after all of the edits have been made, then we can go ahead and, I'm seeing that I'm getting really close to the top of the hour. Talking really fast now. Okay, when all the edits have been made, then you're going to complete your event, and you get some choices there also. I'm going to show, this is the screen when you're completing the event. You get to choose how you want to handle the qualifiers, what you want to merge, you've already established your hierarchy in the EQuiS, so that's already set. But now you get to make some choices on how you want the results and the qualifiers to be handled, and flags for detect and non-detect, those kind of things. So, and once you complete this, once you're happy, then you can hit the Save Qualifiers button down at the bottom, and you're done. And now your applied information is going to go right back into the database automatically. And you can also, there we go. You can also export that output. And we'll kind of get into that a bit more in session 3 when we talk about using DQM to do the grunt work for a more involved review or validation. So I'll hold your hats for that one, and we'll go do that later. So right now what we're doing is we take the final DQM output, and we can do what we want with that to produce what we need for a particular client or region or whatever. And I think I have, here's an example of a really simple report from a 2A review that we can do. And you can see that it's just basically giving you the lab SDG and then each method and what exceptions were found. If there's no exception listed, then there was no there's no problem with the data as far as DQM was concerned. So, and then there's a legend of what the different codes mean down at the bottom. This one was simple because it only had one, but it did have blank contamination. All right, so these were some of the things we were talking about, kind of the bumps in the road that we found, and a lot of this stuff is being worked on and will, be added to or improved in future rollouts. So those are items, the prep analysis, we talked about that, surrogates. The fact that there's not really a validation report, that the conventional type report that we would see, that we're handling that custom, as I showed you, but there's also work being done at ERSOFT to offer more options there. And they do have a lot of custom reporting that can be done already, so that'll improve too. Okay, and the last piece, and this is all of this is gonna be a work in progress, because every time we get something new, we find things that we need to keep on working on and developing. But traceability, you have to know what the QuAP looked like when you used it to review the data. ERSOF's working on a way to do that in a more automated fashion. We also have to have a way to keep record of who did the review and who actually, performed the edits and whatever was done manually and what date the process was performed. DQM allows you to do that, but we also have a sort of a backup system where we use specifically export and send files to identify some of that. Our recommendations are that you do really good record keeping. You really get consistent with your process, and of course have an SOP that you can follow. And that should go a long way. Again, we said in the first session, you got to keep monitoring because you want to make sure that nothing goes sideways unbeknownst to you and you end up with things that you weren't expecting and don't want. So we recommend that you do some sort of parallel review or some kind of percentage check where you go deep and look at things and make sure you're still on target. I think that I keep hearing valid value creep where things, get kind of away from what originally started and things might not match up and you would have checks that didn't perform correctly. Okay, and now I'm going to be quiet because I think we're right on like almost a few minutes to go. So any questions, any comments?
Yeah, we do have a few questions that I'll ask, and any of you guys that want to answer can answer. The first one was actually earlier in the session. And the question was, if you have multiple QC issues, for example, low surrogate, reported less than the RL and things like that, shouldn't the qualifier represent the cumulative bias? So this is almost a philosophical question maybe, but.
Well, that's what I was talking about when you'd love to be able to put like a J, or we used to joke about having J squared or something like that. But honestly, there actually are a couple of report formats where there are tables, I don't recall what region that is, where they actually have all of the multiple qualifiers and then superscripts and subscripts to show you what they all are. Mm-hmm. But once a result is estimated, it's estimated. It isn't a little bit estimated. There's no such thing. So yeah, agreed. It's nice to know that all of those things are wrong, but that kind of goes with that overall assessment. If you've got so much going on with your data where you've got, all low recoveries and a lot of variability, it's important to tell the client that. But you can have multiple remarks, you can have multiple reason codes, but the actual qualifier on your result is just going to be, a merged either J's or UJ's or an NJ or whatever. There is no J squared. So, but yeah, put all the reasons in there and keep them in there. And then, when you see it, like in that little report that I showed, that was just wherever it is, that right there. Whoops. Over here in the reason codes, there would be a whole lot of them separated by maybe commas, I think is what they are. And you would see all of those and you'd have a hint right away that, oh yeah, there's a lot wrong with these results. I should be, worried. And if they're all going in a particular direction, high or low, yeah, those would be there. You would know low recovery on something or high recovery, whatever.
Yep. And then that actually goes to, there was an additional question just a few minutes ago about can reason codes be concatenated? And yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about here. But the short answer is yes.
Yes.
So perfect.
Yeah, sometimes they get pretty ugly because there's a whole bunch of reason codes in that little box, and yeah, but they're all defined down at the bottom, so you'll know what they are.
Yep. We one of the other questions was, and Liz, you sort of already answered this, so you can elaborate if you want to a little bit. But the question was, do you put EQuIS into the QuAP to avoid having null issues placed into the database, and then do you ultimately remove the EQuIS after the fact or something like that? And Liz, did you want to take that one?
So there's a parameter in the QuAPs that allows you to decide whether or not you want to use the EQuIS qualifier as basically null. And so DQM requires that you use all of the rules that are included in a QuAP, because it has to step through all of those pieces of logic in order to finish the whole piece. And in some cases, those logic components aren't applicable for you. Like if you don't want to flag samples that have a concentration much larger than a detected value in a blank, then you would maybe associate that particular part of the logic chain or that specific rule with an NQ qualifier, and then that ultimately DQM would turn into a nothing. But because that particular piece of logic is there, that record will show up in the review process so that you can see, yep, there's a blank hit, and oh, this particular result has a value that's greater than, you know, the blank times the multiplier or whatever that looks like, so that you can apply a professional judgment if necessary, but also trust that DQM captured all the stuff that you expected it to.
Yep. Perfect. And we'll answer a couple more questions because there's a whole bunch in the chat, but if folks have to drop off, you can always take a look at the recording, or we'll also do a little bit of a recap in the next session as well. So and if you're worried that you're going to miss anything, but you have to leave, don't worry, we'll capture things. So the next one here is, are there any rollback capabilities, or would you basically just roll back the entire lab EDD and revalidate at worst case? That's a good question.
So I was just finishing up writing that as you read the question out. There are currently no rollback capabilities in DQM. That doesn't mean that you can't use the same data set in DQM more than once. Like you could pick up that same data set and walk through the validation process again. If there were anything that were changed, like what Dee was talking about with, you know, your result values or things like that, it won't restore those records to their original state. But you could alter those qualifiers as necessary if you decide that the original set of qualifiers or reason codes wasn't appropriate. But if you needed to return the record to its original state, you'd basically have to find the original lab EDD and then do the appropriate commit process via EDP or EQuIS Data Processor.
One of the few acronyms I think we didn't actually define earlier.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, we have done that. We have rolled back entire SDGs on a number of occasions.
Yeah.
It can be done.
Yes.
It works. So.
Absolutely. Cool. Next question. Does DQM require sticking with combined qualifiers or multiple qualifiers, or can either be used? And Liz, you sort of had already answered this, but you want to give us the high points?
So kind of like with the reason codes, DQM will let you either use ranking to pick your favorite or to combine those qualifiers. And there's a whole article on how the particular logic for that works. But that's going to be on a QuAP level. So if you wanted it to maybe rank some qualifiers and merge others, that's not current functionality that exists.
Okay. Perfect. Next one, what were the issues with the prep and analytical batches that needed to be resolved? Who knows?
We couldn't. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Well,
No.
What we found was
Go ahead.
We couldn't save if we couldn't save the event that we were working on if we had. We didn't have a way to have both of those in there and be able to save the event. We had to choose one or the other. But then your folks found a way to do that. So.
Yep. Now, initially DQM, probably last year's releases, if not earlier, did not allow you, like you had to pick a single batch type. So you could have prep or you could have analysis, but you couldn't have both. Now you can include both of those batch association types in your QuAP. So the issue that was related to that has been resolved. Yep.
Cool. The next one, I love this question. Can you clarify whether DQM is for data already loaded to the database versus data pending upload? And the reason I love this question is because it's like one of the only questions I actually know the answer to, which is that it is, you do run DQM after the data's already been loaded to the database. So you're not doing it like in EDP or anything like that. It's once it's actually been loaded in into EQuIS. Right, ladies?
Yes.
Checking. Okay. The next one, let's see, this is a bit of a long one here. Have you had to deal with lab QC samples that are included in more than one EDD for the same project site and sampling event? And then there's a comment that goes along with this, which is, this causes duplicate data in a single EDD, or if the data is loaded in separate EDDs, it reassigns the SDG for the lab QC sample, depending on which EDD was loaded first, and the default commit type to load the data. So insert and merge or insert and update. Insert and merge assigns the lab sample with SDG of the first loaded EDD, where the insert and update will reassign the SDG of the lab QC sample to the EDD loaded last. So going back to the question, which was, have you had to deal with lab QC samples that are included in more than one EDD for the same project site or sampling event?
Well, we had somebody internal do something for us to fix that in the EDDs, that we can process our EDDs through and assigns that additional information to the sample or the QC sample ID. But I don't know if EarthSoft may be working on something to do that too, or there may be something available.
I don't think there's any current plans, at least in terms of that process, because it is sort of like a case-by-case basis. Some folks like to include those batch QC samples and give them unique identifiers for each SDG. Some folks like to see the relationships across, like the batches across different SDGs. So we haven't done anything specific to address that, but we're open to ideas if folks want to see that included in future builds.
And I know there's a few more questions in the chat, but we're only going to, I think, answer stuff today that came in before the top of the hour. We'll save these other ones. We'll either follow up with you guys or we'll cover them in the next one, and we'll do a bit of a recap. And so the last question that we'll answer here today is, have you come up with a way to link the field QC samples to the rest of the field samples in EQuIS, which are associated with the lab QC samples? There is a table called DT Field QC Batch Partner. It's hard to say. Are you using that table? I don't know if I read that weird or not. Does that make any sense to you guys? I think Liz is rereading it.
So I'm reading our roadmap for DQM, because I'm pretty sure that association piece is coming up, but I'm trying to figure out when that is. Oh, and there's so many words to try to read through quickly. I will have to get back to you on the details of when that is. Maybe we can follow up next time.
Yeah, perfect. But it sounds like it's on the roadmap at least.
It's definitely
something in the near future. Cool. Perfect. All right. Well, thanks, guys. Sorry we didn't get to quite all of the questions, but we'll, like I said, we'll wrap these up and follow up on anything that we didn't get a chance to cover today. We hope you all join us for our third session, which, as we mentioned, is just in a couple of weeks. It'll be the same connection information that you used to join today, and it'll be on, what is that, October 20th, I think, at the same time. So we hope to see all of you then, and we will provide all of the recording and if there's any other materials we need to provide in preparation for that next session, we will do that as well, probably sometime next week. So thanks so much, everybody, for being here. Dee and Polly, of course, ladies, thank you so much, for Dee especially doing all that talking today. We really appreciate you guys being here and like I said earlier, collaborating on this together. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is. Thank you.
It's been a lot of fun. Thanks, ladies.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. We'll see everybody next time.